There you go. All right, so we're going to pick up with working with the sellers, and we are working with the listing side of the house, right? What are we going to do on the listing side of the house? And protect the seller's interest. Obviously, that's one of our main things. And again, if you have anything you want to add or a point you want to make or share with us, just jump in. We need to make sure that we do a CMA. And again, you have MLS or RPR. You decide what you want to use. Maybe use a combination of the two of them. It totally depends on how you want to do business. Want to make sure that we get the paperwork together, then get it signed. And when we say get it signed, we're talking about them signing it, plus we need to sign. Listing agreement is not a contract unless both parties have signed it. So the fact that they signed it and it's sitting in your files doesn't really do us any good. We need to have it signed by you as well. And make sure all the components of the contract are fully signed, and that the seller gets a copy of everything they sign. So we don't have to worry about that part. Any kind of a call or inquiry that we get from our clients, we need to make sure that we handle that. I don't think that's a problem today. Within this company, most of us respond pretty quick when somebody closes. Make sure that especially if it's a client, which is the focus here, make sure that we have the listing activities set up. If you're going to have showings, what do you want on the showing? Make sure you set that up on MLS. If there's going to be any restrictions, they have a dog or a cat or whatever it is, or they only want showings at a certain time, which I would not recommend. If you have a seller and they say, I only want my house shown in the evening, or I only want it shown on the weekends, that's hard to work with, and it's going to cause a problem in trying to get the property sold. We want to give the buyer access to that property when the buyer has time to see it. And it's not about being more flexible with a buyer than the seller, but sometimes if you don't handle this up front, you're going to run into issues with it, right? So you always want to have that conversation with the seller, always, about showings and what they expect and how it works. Occasionally you'll have a buyer in town that's only going to be here for 2 or 3 days. They don't have time to mess around. They want to see the property. And they may be wanting to look at 8 or 10 properties in that 2 or 3 days because they have to make a decision on what they're going to do. So we need to get in there. And if it's not going to be convenient to the seller, I'm sorry. If it's your listing, your job is to get the property sold. We need to be able to show the property whenever the buyer is available. Now, with that being said, I understand that sometimes it just doesn't work for one reason or another, but our job is to try to make that work as best we can. And the only way we can do that is by talking to them about it up front. One of the other bullets on here is to make sure that if you get an extension, that it gets signed. If I have a listing agreement and it's due to expire today, I have to make sure that I do the amendment for that listing before midnight tonight, not tomorrow. Right? I want it done today. And that's not me just sending it to them. That means it needs to be signed by them to actually be able to extend the amendment. Do not rely on any other source. Please get the paperwork to go with that. And that will keep everything nice and clean out on your side of the transaction. Even if it's hard, occasionally we want to make sure that we communicate with the seller if there's a problem someplace. And if you haven't, you will have the opportunity to go into somebody's house where things aren't quite the way you would like to see them. I think one of the worst ones I went into was in Santa Rosa, where they had pets, dogs and cats, that lived in the house. And the house had a smell, which we can probably fix some of that. But there was dog hair or cat hair, whatever, all over everything. No matter where you sat, it was right. And for some people, that's an issue. There's some people that are allergic to those animals. So if there are pets, we want to make sure we maybe put that in agent remarks so the buyer's agent can be aware of it. If the pets are going to be outside, one of the listings I had here in Harlingen, they had a pit bull but they always kept him in the backyard, chained up in the backyard. Anytime we were going to have showing, it was going to be chained up in the backyard. We had one of those, they want to see the house in 15 minutes. I called the seller and say, hey, look, I know this is short notice, but we really need to do this. Or they seem like they're interested. I know this agent. Let's try to make this happen. He goes, great. Do you want to go over and put the dog on the chain? He's really friendly. He won't bother you. I go, oh, never mind. Forget it. We'll wait. Because I'm not going to mess with somebody else's dog myself. We'll let them take care of that. So please keep in mind that we'll do what we can, but we also have other things we need to be aware of. There's a bullet on there about seller's net proceeds. We always do the seller's net proceeds. Every time you go to take a listing, you should do a seller's net proceeds. And anytime you get an offer, you do the seller's net proceeds. We want to make sure that we have that information available for them. And if you get two offers, you do a net proceeds on both of them based on what's in the contract. So for example, if you have an offer that's FHA and an offer that's conventional, there's going to be different fees with it, different monies probably associated with it. FHA usually asks for some help with closing costs. Conventional doesn't. Conventional may be lower because it's conventional. You know, little things like that. And you want to work all that out with them as you're trying to work through that. And then this last one, be available for the closing and follow up regularly after they close. You should attend, and you'll hear that at least twice, buyer services when we talk about that, and seller services. In my opinion, you should attend every closing you have. Doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on, buyer or seller, attend the closing, every closing with your client, if at all possible. If at all possible. Any questions on any of those? All right, so the next thing I want to do here is share the screen with you. We're going to switch screens. And
hey, Mac, is there a preferred seller's net sheet that you use? Do you use the ones on MLS or the capital title one as an example?
That's thanks for asking that. That's good. Yes. I use one from the title company. I don't use the one from MLS. MLS, RPR, and Zip Form all have them, but they don't auto-populate. The one from the title companies they'll populate with their fees and all that stuff, so I don't have to guess at what their fees are or go look it up. So I can go in, like I use Stewart Title is the one we actually use here in Harlingen, and I can go in, I plug in the price, the closing date, if there's going to be any buyer's closing costs, that kind of thing, make adjustments for the taxes and the commission, and then I have it all right there. It's real easy to work with. And I can upload that into whatever system I'm using. Like if I use RPR, I can upload that into my valuation workbook to include that with those pages. So, but always use that. If you do the manual way, I used to use the Zip Form one all the time. And the problem with that is you have to manually put all those numbers in. So it works. It's just a little more work, and it may not be as accurate as if you pull it from their site. All right, so on the screen right now, what you should see is Cameron County Appraisal District. And they are out doing their assessments, I believe. One of the cars with a sign on it, one of the neighbors sent me a text, said, hey, Cameron County's out in front of your house. It's like, oh, great. And what they do is they park the car and they'll walk the neighborhood, take pictures and do all that stuff because they're doing their assessments on the properties. But that's part of it. All right, so I'm using CameronCAD.org. And by the way, you have CameronCAD, you have Hidalgo, you have Star, Willacy. It doesn't matter which county you're in. If you want to reach all the counties in one click, basically, you can go to trueautomation.com. TrueAutomation.com has all the counties on there within the state of Texas. And you can go there and pull them up instead of trying to remember all the different, is it CameronCAD.com or org, or is it Hidalgo AD, for example? How do they have that set up? So you can just go to True Automation and pull it up by county, which works really well. Anyway, so this is the main one. What I wanted to show you here is you want property search or map search. you can actually do either one of them. I use the property search just as an example, and I show you this because this is a part of the handout that you have as well. But because if I'm on the listing side, I want to look at this first. In fact, a lot of times I would look at the tax records while they're on the phone. If they called in, for example, and said, hey, can you help me sell my property? I'm pulling up the tax records first. Today, I would probably pull up RPR first if I was to get one of those calls, but tax records is what we use for years. You notice right here, it says 2022 values not available. Some counties, last time I think it was last year, actually, Hidalgo County had theirs. Let me just see what they have right quick. You guys may already know. On Hidalgo County, what they had was they would show the taxes, but they were for some reason that didn't work. That's all right. It would show the taxes, but it would tell you that it's not, they're not there. The taxes don't get assessed. They go through the process. They don't actually get put on the account until the summertime. And then we want to make sure that we have the right one. So I'm going to go back here and pull up 2021. And I'm just going to type in Smith, just a common name, so we can take a look at this. So when this comes up, let's see. I'm going to grab one of these here. All right, Coastal Creek, there you go. And what I want to do on this is I want to show you just a couple little things to look for. One is you have the legal description, right? And in Cameron County, you'll find a lot of lot and block. Almost every property is going to have a lot and block. Hidalgo County, you don't see that as much. In Hidalgo County, you might see a lot, but you don't see the block to go with it as much. Cameron County, you have a lot and block on almost everything. So that's your legal description. That's what we're going to put on the listing agreement. That's what's going to go on our MLS. That's what's going to go on our contracts. We need to make sure that we have that correct in the way that we put it down. Remember, in pre-licensing, they always talked about, or you probably heard the word homogeneity, meaning that there's no two pieces of property the same, right? And that goes back to the legal description aspect of it. Down here on the bottom, we have exemptions, and this has HS, which is homestead, and then other. Now, if I didn't know what that was, I could go into exemptions, and here I can actually do control find on my HP. You may not be able to do that on a Mac. But you type in other and see what it is, for example. And other exemptions include, and there may be other things on there so that you can find out what they might be, or what it might be that you're working with. You have religious organizations, charitable organizations, other property not. But I also know that other is occasionally on one of the counties, it's also you're over 65 because they're no longer labeled on here. DV, for example, is disabled veteran. HS, like I said, HS is homestead. So you can go through and figure those out, find out what they are so you know what you're dealing with, right? And then as you look down through here, look at the tax values. And when I was just talking about the county appraiser being out here in his car, good neighborhood watch is awesome. Home site value, that's for the improvements, right? And then you have the land value, that's the lot. Now this one doesn't have any exemptions as far as ag or any of that stuff. And this is the assessed value of the property, the assessed value, not the market value. And so when we're talking to the sellers, a lot of times we ask them, how much do you think your property's worth? They'll tell us that. Well, where did you get that from? How did you figure that out? Well, that's what the county says it's worth. Okay. Depending on where you're at, will depend on how valuable that number is. Like Cameron County, in Cameron County, you can take that number, generally speaking, that number in 15 to 20% and probably be close to market value. Hidalgo County is not that way. Not even close to that. But knowing which county you're working with and how that works, that assessed value does have a value in what we do. It does have a little bit of an impact on what we do. We need to be aware of it. And then you look at the taxing jurisdiction. When we're talking about the seller's estimated net, I mentioned the adjustments, right? So adjustments for taxes, that tax rate is what I want to use. When I look at the tax rate, if I plug this in to the title company's app, it'll give me the actual taxes based on the price of the property, which is what we want. And then over here, if we are on the listing side, we want to use taxes without exemptions. That's what goes into MLS, taxes without exemptions, all the way across the board. And then as you're looking at this and talking to them about the property and what is it they like about the property, what makes the property special, have they added anything to the property, you can look down through here and see what they have. BV stands for brick veneer, and again, RS6P, I can click on class and a box will open up and tell me what that is and how that falls into play. And that's on just about every one of the county, different county websites. They'll have these little hot links where you can get that information for it. So one of the other things is, if I take this square footage, that's what's going to go in MLS. That's the square footage I'm going to use for MLS. But what if the seller has added on to it and they say, well, that's wrong. It's actually 3,000 square feet. Now what do I do? And the answer to that is when you go into MLS, go ahead, Vanessa.
Aren't you supposed to go by what the county says regardless, though?
No.
No?
You
It's
put it as
it's
per
usually
seller.
Pardon me?
Oh, no, you just put it on there as per seller.
Oh, okay,
what is it?
perfect.
Right. MLS allows you to identify the source. Most MLSs have it where you identify the source. You see tax records, owner, or whatever. Some of them have agent measured, and I would highly recommend you don't measure the property. You can do what you want, but I'm telling you, if you put on there that you measured the property and you say this is what it is, you just took on a whole bunch of liability if that's not the square footage. There's been complaints filed because tax record says, like this one says 2682, the buyer gets it and finds out it's only 2,500. They're going to be upset about it. So one of the forms that we have in zip form is information from other sources. Information from other sources, and every buyer should get that form. Every buyer should get it, in my opinion. Information from other sources. Every buyer should get it. And the reason they should get it is because we're taking information from the tax records. If I represent the buyer, I'm going to go in here and make sure that the information on MLS is correct. And I'm also taking information from MLS. So I want those two forms attached to that form, information from other sources. And I want the buyer to know that this is the best I can do. If it's wrong, I'm sorry, but I can only give you what I have. Right. And that's what that form is designed for. And it has helped a whole lot of people. And it was created because of square footage issues where agents would quote as if it's never wrong, the square footage out of the tax records, and they're wrong sometimes.
Also, Mac, I had an issue where the property address, whatever's listed on HCAD.
Right.
So for example, it shows that the city is listed as Elsa, but when I asked the agent, she's like, no, it's Edinburgh. It's registered with the US Postal Service in Edinburgh. So we have to go and do an amendment on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I had an issue with street versus court also.
Right. Absolutely. So if you'll, when you go to take a listing, if you'll go into USPS and just do a search for the property, it'll tell you what it is. Because there's one in Harlingen we had where it had 3 different, just like you were just talking about, Vanessa. It was Kiki de la Garza or something like that. It's a circle, so it should be circle in my mind. But it was street or drive. There was 3 different responses on there, and the title company said we're only going to accept what is on USPS. That's it. And Lyford the same way. We had a property up there that had 3 different addresses, but that's a whole different ballgame. You get out in the rural areas, you'll find that they have some really off the wall stuff going on sometimes. But that one in Lyford was crazy. But do the best you can with it. If you have any questions or need help with it, let us know. The other way is the county has a 911. So the county engineers, if I have a property that does not have an address, I go to the county 911 and they will actually, you give them the legal description you have and they will actually give you an address for it, right? They have all this mapped out. They know what they're doing with it in most cases. And like in Cameron County, they'll go out and they'll stick a stick in the ground with a little flag on it and tell you that's, 2152 such and such, right? Not a problem. Because doing repos, we used to get stuff out in the middle of nowhere, but I need a mailing address. I can't use the legal description. So we'd have to get the county to do that for us a lot. Some of the other things as you're looking through this, please remember that when you're looking at the square footage, because this is one of my mistakes that I made, we have the square footage here. And when a listing I had in Edinburgh, this square footage and the total of these all added up to 1, but I didn't pay any attention to it. That's where I made a mistake at. I just took this square footage and threw it in MLS. And a broker called me and said, I think there's a problem with your square footage. I'm like, yeah, okay, right. Hung up the phone, went back to tax records and took a look at it. And what they did was, it was a 2-story building and they had the a 2-story home and the square footage on the top and the bottom that they had listed here, like you have the main area, right? And then you have the main area 2nd floor. My main area 2nd floor was the same. And so the square footage was off. It was wrong because on the bottom floor, we also had the garage and didn't show a garage on the tax records. So we lost that one completely, right? I had to fix that. All right, so you go into the tax records, you take a look at it and find out what's going on with it. Make sure that you have the right information that you're using. And then since we're here, I would also ask you to look at the description for the deeds or how has it been transferred so that you can figure out what's going on there. Because there is a little bit of a difference in the way a property might transfer. And you can also have the opportunity to see about the chain of title, making sure there's not any gap or whatever in here as best you can. But what kind, like this one's a warranty deed, right? That's your general warranty deed. So that's not a problem. But we had an affidavit of heirship, which means family, right? Probably. And then from that, we went to a warranty deed, which means it was probably sold. But if you get in and you see a special warranty deed, that means the property was probably foreclosed on someplace. So take a look at it and just see what's there so that you know what you're working with as well. Any question on this? Nope. All right, so you can see some of those same things in RPR. The other day we had a little bit of a class on RPR and what happens with that. So one of the other items I wanted to show you real quick is the seller's disclosure notice, because that gets into this. So you go in with your listing agreement and the seller's disclosure notice. The seller is the only one authorized to touch with this, right? We're not going to write on it. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to interpret it. Here's what you want to write here. None of that. We just don't do that. It should be self-explanatory. However, for today, I want to touch base on some basic things. this seller is or is not occupying the property, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. If there's reasons for them not to have a seller's disclosure, but not occupying it is not a reason. And working with investors, if they bought a property, they've probably done something to it. So we need a seller's disclosure notice for that. On the seller's disclosure notice, we give that to them. And remember, there's two. There's the TREC seller's disclosure notice and the Texas Realtors. This is Texas Realtors. Tells you that at the top. So Texas Realtors, there's two of them. And the client is the one that makes the decision which one we're going to use. Norma has said she'd prefer that we use this one. So when I presented it years ago, if I was presented today, I'd probably do the same thing. I would tell the sellers, there's two seller's disclosure notices. There's one by the Texas Real Estate Commission and the Texas Realtors Association, which we belong to. And that's the one we like to use. That's okay with you, right? And I never had anybody tell me no. Because they don't really know the difference, but they do have the choice, and we need to make sure that we let them know that. When you give this to them, I used to give this to them and tell them I'd be back in 3 days to pick it up, because they're going to need some time to fill it out. They need to fill this out, right? So, and it's not something where they're just going to draw lines through it. If a seller refuses to fill this out, or if they just draw, like what I seen last night, somebody just drew lines across each box on here, like a line through section 2 right here, like it didn't apply. If the seller does that, what's the possibility of a problem there? Or what kind of a problem would that be? Or could that be? And so that you can explain it to them, if they sell the property, the state property code, not TREC, not you and me, the state property code requires a seller's disclosure notice to be given to the consumer, to the buyer, requires it. It's not an option, right? Any residential property must have a disclosure. There are some exemptions. Again, if it's family or if it's a foreclosure, those are some exemptions. There's a few others in there, but most of the time you're not going to see those exemptions. If the seller does not give this to the buyer finds something wrong, and they can prove that the seller should have known about it or did know about it, that opens them up for deceptive trade practices. Deceptive, because you're selling a home, right? Which is going to actually throw us in the middle of this thing too. If they file a complaint against the seller for deceptive trade practices and we're the seller's agent, then the seller is going to blame that on us. So we need to make sure that this gets filled out correctly. Anyway, it's pretty simple. If there's something on here that they don't understand, like for example, there is one on here about a French drain. What is a French drain, right? And sellers will sometimes ask about that. What is that? And what I used to tell them was, honestly, if you don't know what it is, I wouldn't worry about it. Whatever block that is, just mark it unknown, right? It's to the best of your ability. If it's something you know about, then we want to make sure that we disclose that. Lead-based paint or paint hazards, then they would mark yes, but if they mark yes, we need to include the lead-based paint addendum. My main reason for showing this to you is on section 5, right here, flood insurance coverage. If yes, attach this form. So once we give it to the seller, we get it back, we need to take a look at it, make sure we have everything. And if they marked yes on any of these items that require an attached form, we need to make sure they get that attached form, because that is a part of it. It's not optional, right? It makes it complete. If you have any questions about it, you can always ask. This one asks about inspections. So if you've had an inspection in the last 4 years, you are supposed to attach that. If yes, attach copies, right? If you don't have the copies, of that inspection, then you can annotate that, put that on there. But if you've received any written inspection reports, well, if you had an inspection but you didn't get the copies, there's nothing I can do about that, right? You didn't receive them. And we run across that sometimes as listing agents. And then make sure they sign it. And then if you're a listing agent, make sure that you get a copy of the buyer's signature back as well. We need to have that back as well. All right. Any questions on those? Yes.
Yes. I thought we couldn't share, or we shouldn't share the inspection report if I have a seller and we had an offer and we wanted a contract, for example, and they send us an inspection report. I thought we wouldn't be able to share that because it's their information.
So both the Texas Realtors and the Trek one says if you've had any previous inspections, right, you need to disclose that. This one actually says attach them if you've had them. So if you get it, then you need to share it. One of the concerns is that inspection copywritten? So, and if that's the case, and I'll be honest about it, right now, Texas Realtors this is one of the forms we're looking at, because I'm on the committee. We're rewriting some of their forms, and we should have that done by April. And this is one of them that we're working on right here, just because of what I just told you. Inspectors are saying that's copywritten only for the buyer, not for anybody else, period. And then the buyer shares it with us. Well, that's a violation of copyright because you're not supposed to share it. If we go sharing it like this to the seller, or the seller shares it with somebody else, then we certainly have issues there. So, but the way this is written right now, this is what's expected. The other thing is, if there's any discrepancies on that seller's just on the inspection, there's a form for updating the seller's disclosure. But the Trek attorneys have said they would not do that. What they did say was, if I have an inspection and there's discrepancies with the property, what they would recommend is just do a new seller's disclosure notice. If we're going to update it, instead of doing an update, because the updated form is just a form saying I update this, right? What Trek is saying, instead of doing that, just do a whole new form and get it over with, and limit their liability, limit the possibility of leaving something out, I guess is what they're getting at. So that's what we're told. Any other questions there? All right, so here. So that brings us back to the listing agreement. When we talk about the listing agreement, just for information purposes, please understand that. Back this up. When we look at the information here on the parties, it's parties, property, and price. Every contract we have is parties, property, and price. That's the first three paragraphs. And the parties, it's Remax Elite. That's what goes in there, Remax Elite. And then you can put your name off to the side or wherever if you want to. That's not a requirement. Remax Elite is a requirement. And then your phone number and your email address. You do not have to have the company phone number or email address on there. You want yours on there because you are the one handling this listing. And then again, the property description, make sure we put the property description in there the way it's supposed to be done. When we look at known as, right? On this example right here, this is wrong. On this example, it should have 417. You have the street name and the zip code, and that's specifically what it says, address. So you have the number, street name, and the zip code. That's all you need in there. And if it's a condominium, then we want to attach the condominium addendum. That's right there on that. I don't know why agents miss that, other than it's in print, but we need that, right? It's supposed to be there. If you have a listing for a condo, want to put that in there. When you're actually working on the term, please remember it says ends right there, right? So it ends. That's what I've been getting at over time with this. this listing agreement and the buyer rep both say ends. So it's over with at that time. And then you have your commission. That commission is decided between you and the client. Norma has in the policy and procedures manual what she recommends, but that's negotiable and between you and your client. I would not tell the client it's negotiable. As we've said in some of the other training, I, for example, just say my commission is this and wait for them to respond most of the time. Protection period, and this isn't the whole listing agreement. It's just some of the pages that we have issues with. On the protection period, I use 30 days. This one has 60, but I use 30 because the protection period, if you'll actually read it, it says it if they were to sell their property to somebody else that you showed the property to, then they owe you a commission, right? They owe the company a commission. But to make that work, I have to provide them a list of everybody that's seen the property during the time that we had it listed. And I have to provide that list within 10 days or all bets are off. I don't have time to keep up with everybody that's seen the property. I mean, I have that probably in a file, right? If I've used showing time or something like that, that I can probably find out who's shown the property, but I don't have the names of every one of those individuals, right? The other thing is the paragraph right below that states that if they list with another realtor, so my listing expires today and they list with Eric tomorrow, I don't get anything, period. And that's right in the listing agreement. And it doesn't matter if I have it listed today, somebody shows it today and they write the offer tomorrow, he's the listing agent tomorrow, he gets that. And there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. So if the listing is due to expire, we want to make sure that we extend it properly, which means before it ends, so we don't have any problems there. Key box broker is authorized to place a key box on the property. If the property has a tenant in there, there's another form for the tenant's permission. So this gives us, the seller's given us permission, but if it's leased out, we need their permission before we go putting a lockbox on there. Because if anything goes wrong, that's their contents in that property. And we want to make sure that we have it all covered. When we look at this right here, this is the way this should probably be done. And what I'm saying here is sometimes with some agents, you'll see they'll leave these blank, like the two, they'll do A1 and B1, but they won't do 2. And again, that's between you and your client or the brokerage client, but I don't mess with this. I just put whatever the split is that I've agreed to or the one I want to work with the seller. I used to years ago have this broken down like 3 for MLS and 2 for non-MLS. The more productive you become, the harder it is to keep up with little things like that. And it's not that big of a deal in my opinion. Just get it done. If you're not, so we have licensees in the area, but they're not MLS. All areas have that, right? Because that's all that Texas requires. You can get a license. You don't have to belong to the board. You don't have to belong to the MLS. I've had them bring buyers in, and they'll ask what the commission is, and out of habit, I say, this is what we have. And I don't want to have to go back and look at it. So it's easier for me to work with it that way. But again, you can do whichever way you want. Just make sure that you have it accurate. And if this commission changes, make sure you get it in writing, right? We have an amendment to the listing agreement. Intermediary, we all know what that is. It means it's within the office. Either seller authorizes it or they don't. And then this is what I was talking about or have talked about here recently in classes. On here for the financing, will the seller consider the first 5? And that's what I use all the time, the first 5 all the time. And the reason for that, when I'm talking to the seller, is I want to get somebody to the table. And yes, I understand you don't want to do VA, or I understand you don't want to do Texas Veterans Land Board. I understand all that. but let's get somebody to the table and then we'll work from there. Without that, we don't have anything we can work with. And then down here at the bottom, you guys should have this box marked down at the bottom, and then your signature, your name, and everything on the bottom. Not like it is up here on top, but it's that way because that's the way you filled it out on the first page. Any questions about any of those? Anybody?
No, sir.
All right, so one of the other real quick ones here on this one is the information about brokerage services. Please remember that all 4 lines need to be filled out. For those of you in Corpus Christi, that first line is Remax Elite. Remax Elite. That first line is Remax Elite. For those of you in Corpus Christi, Remax Elite. And the second line, designated broker, is Norman Hinojosa. Now, the supervisor would be, in most cases, will be Nina, unless you're joining a team. If you're on the KB team, for example, up there, then KB would be the licensed supervisor on there. But Remax Elite, Norman Hinojosa, and then all the information. This must be filled out. All lines must have something in them. Cannot be blank. And this is the amendment to the listing. Once again, you have maybe you're changing the price, or maybe you're changing the listing date. This helps us document what we have going on. That's all it does. But it's an important part if we want to change anything. You go to change the price, even if, so some agents will take a listing, you'll hear this in some of the classes. I'll take a, not mine, but you may hear me talk about it like this. Some agents will say, Mr. and Ms. Seller, I understand you want to list this high, but let's do a, if we don't get any activity, let's say in 2 weeks, we'll drop the price by 5,000. Yes, that's fine. And they'll write that in the listing agreement. So you do have it in writing, but I can tell you from past experience, you probably want to go ahead and do this again, just to reaffirm that that's what they're okay with it. Because if you don't do this, you had that, and they could have, I'm just sharing with you experience, they can come back and say, yes, at that time we were okay, but we changed our mind and nobody talked to us about it. So please do this. Anytime you have a change, make sure you do one of the amendments on it, so we don't have anything. Termination of the listing. Again, on the termination of the listing, this is just like the other items. We want, if the listing is to be terminated for whatever reason, we want to use this form, right? So it makes it formal. Termination of listing, and it's 1410 is the number. If there's going to be a fee, we can write that in here. We make that decision in working with the seller. And I made a comment, I think it was yesterday, or maybe, I think it was yesterday. One of my first listings, the broker charged them $500. Well, this was the form we used, right? Because they wanted to terminate. Charge them $500. It allows you to do that. If the seller calls the broker or you and says, I want to terminate the listing, you are not authorized to tell them it's okay, right? As an agent, because the listing belongs to the broker. Norma's pretty good about working with this stuff. So you know what's going on better than anybody else. In previous companies, brokers would not allow us to make that change. And as a manager, I had the opportunity to deal with sellers who didn't, I've decided I don't want my property listed with this person. Well, that's fine. We can move it to somebody else and we still keep it in-house, right? But if it came to termination, that listing belongs to the broker. So they're the ones that should say, yes, we're terminating, no, we're not, etc. And in most cases, we're going to probably say, yes, not a problem. Just get this done. As far as the fees go, that's entirely negotiable at the time. So let's see what we have going on with that before we actually do that. All right, any questions on any of those? That one. Some mix around here real quick. Still on track. Oh. Well, that didn't work too well. All right, so let's try this again. Technology is awesome. All right. So on the listing side, and again, this handout for this is in the chat for you as well. On the listing side of this, when we start working on that aspect of this, when we first talk to them, we need to find out what it is they're interested in, why are they doing what they're doing, etc. Find out as much information as possible. There's 3 basic questions. If you get a phone call from a seller, somebody says, hey, I'm thinking about selling my property, or if you talk to them face to face, there's 3 basic questions you can always ask. Why are you selling? How soon do you need it sold by? And, oh, by the way, based on what you know, what do you think your property's worth? And then you have some of these questions, things that you might want to work with. But the 3 that I just gave you are really important and they work all the time. Why are you selling? How soon do you need it sold by? And oh, by the way, what do you think your property's worth based on what you know about today? This says leave a printed listing presentation or email it ahead of time. You don't see it in the Lower Valley. I don't know about Corpus Christi, but you don't see it in the Lower Valley very much. But in Austin years ago, what we used to do is a pre-listing package. So for example, we would send this over to the seller. If they called and said they wanted to sell their property, and I scheduled an appointment for tonight at 6 or tomorrow, I would have this delivered to them. And in fact, one of the teams, I was not on the team, I just worked with them. They had a college kid that would deliver a basket that would have our listing packet on it or in it, along with the forms that we needed, like seller's disclosure and etc. A video by David Knox and Starbucks. And this college kid would deliver that basket to whatever property we had in the Austin area for us. That was our pre-listing package getting delivered. Here in the Valley, you just don't see it happening very often. Most people just go to the property and okay, let's go. But this works, and it makes it a lot smoother if you've done this. However, I will also tell you that even in Austin, we went through all that work to get those things delivered. And when I'd show up is, have you had a chance to take a look at the video? No. Have you had a chance to take a look at the paperwork? No. Right? So it's a nice gesture, but it may not work depending on how busy they are. But those are some of the things you want to include in there. The second visit with them. So when it says second visit, there's what is called a 2-step. One, you go out and you take a look at the property. Second one, you go back and you actually lay everything out with them. I would not recommend that today, personally. And the reason for not recommending it is because you may not get a second chance. When you show up the first time, you may not know everything about the property. And I work both, primarily not a 2-step anymore, because I was burned on that. And that's why I tell you that it may not get the listing. When you go out there, if I have to make adjustments in my CMA, when I do a CMA, just like you, I have a recommended price range, right? That price range is based on everything I can see and everything I may have gained from them while talking on the phone. So you need to ask the questions, right? Have you done anything to the property since you purchased it? If so, when was that? How much was it? You can get all that information together just on the phone before you actually go to the property. And today, if it's ever been on the property, you can probably pull up in RPR or on Zillow pictures of it from before. So you can actually see, maybe while you're talking to them, see what the place looks like and find out what they've done. So you can get a rough idea. If I need to make an adjustment, I can do that while I'm sitting at the table with them. But again, you have 2-step or the single step, whichever works best for you and your personality and which way you're doing things. But on that second visit, we want to make sure that we actually do some of the things that's on this sheet. Like, for example, scheduled photos. And it's recommended, comes highly recommended, especially depending on where you're at, that you get a professional to do the photographs. Get a professional to do it. Now, having said that, I only paid for professional photos in my years of actively being a listing agent a couple times. It just was not my thing, but the majority of my listings were 80,000 and below, and the return on investment just wasn't there. So I did have a camera we used just for that. And then when that became an old thing, then we started using the phones, because the camera phones, the cameras on the phones become better like they are today. The cameras on phones are really good, but it's the staging, it's the look, it's everything else that goes with it. So if you have a higher end property, certainly if you have a higher end property, you may want to get professional photography in there. On the listing presentation, we talked about this a little bit this morning as well. You want to have the company information, your personal information, and then the market information. What's going on with it, with that property? You want to be able to talk to them about the specifics, what's happening in the market in your area, right? And as you're doing this, if you've done a market analysis, you know what the average prices are, you know what people are looking for, you know what's moving and what's not. Down on the bottom, highlight what you do differently. And that's where the professional photographer might come into play. The marketing that you do for it. Google Analytics, if you're tracking any of the things for your website or any other place where you place properties for sale, if you're tracking that, you can share that. That's it. Again, that's another thing I tossed out just briefly this morning. All the stats from MLS. Listings I sell for 98% of the list price. Listings I sell close within so many days. All those stats, and you can pull that report from RPR or from MLS so that you can actually work with it. Give them that proof. Let them know what makes you different, what makes you better. And most agents won't do that to begin with. Have something you can show them. Don't just tell them. If that makes sense. If you have some free time, go to Facebook and plug in bad MLS photos. And then you'll learn what not to do, because it's a page on our group on Facebook. Your CMA, we will talk about these a lot as we go through this. Eric actually teaches the CMA for using Matrix and a CMA. But when we look at this, we want to look at active listings, sold listings. The CMA itself, just like the appraisal, is based on the sold listings. That's all it really, I mean, that's all an appraiser uses is sold comps. They look at active, they look at expired, right? And they'll throw that in there, but they don't look at the property specifically other than the sold properties. And that's what we want to use as we do things as well. Look at the sold properties and make sure you're familiar with them. All right, I'm going to skip over these. This all ties right in with the MLS. And we talked briefly this morning, or throughout briefly this morning, I think it was this morning. Location, data cell, and the square footage, those are the things we want to look for. Location, data cell, and square footage. When you talk about location, when you're doing your CMA, you want to make sure that you actually tie into location. You want to tie into the subdivision if at all possible, or within reasonable distance. The books will say within a half a mile, right? But in South Texas, that's going to be hard to do. Date sold, 90 days is ideal. But in most cases, we're going to probably have to look at 6 months. You can go back in time up to 2 years meaning when I say you can, that means the appraiser can go back 2 years, right? And if we're gonna do what they do, then we can go back 2 years. You have to do all this at one time. So when you go into MLS, you click on sold, right? So we want sold, obviously. Location, so you plug in the subdivision, might be the first thing you plug in. So you have sold, subdivision, and then the date, and say 90 days. And if I look at that and there's 100 solds in there, well, then I'm going to have to narrow it down, right? But if I look at it and there's only 3 or 4, then I might want to go 6 months. Now, if I have 10, now I've got something I can work with. Now I add in the third part of that, and that is the size, the square footage. And square footage is 15 to 25% plus or minus. Eric is one of those. Last time I asked him about it, was he sticks with 15%, Eric? Is that right? And so 15 to 25% is what we want to try to work with when we're trying to do the square footage. And I'll tell you, that's different than some people teach. That's different than what some people use. I have been taught to use 200 plus or minus, which is wrong, totally wrong. Especially when you start getting into bigger properties, right? That might work for 1,000 square foot house, but not a 4,000 square foot house. But I can tell you from teaching in San Antonio that that is still out there today. Because I'll have people in GRI class tell me, well, my broker told me I was supposed to use this. Do what your broker tells you. However, if you're trying to make it like the appraisers, this is what you want to do, right? So we want to focus on that aspect of it. And then there's other things in there like the absorption rate. And you'll hear us talk about the absorption rate from time to time. When we talk about absorption rate, we're talking about how many homes are actually being purchased in that area. And there's 2 ways of doing that fairly quickly. One of them is in RPR, right? If you don't want to work the math out yourself. RPR will do that. In the evaluation workbook, it's some of the last pages. It's like the 3rd or 4th page from the back of evaluation workbook. Or you can do it in Matrix. There may be a way in Navica, but I'm not familiar with that aspect of Navica as of yet. Didn't used to be. But basically what it amounts to is you take the amount of sold properties, let's say in the last 6 months, there's been, just an example, let's say in the last 6 months, there's been 12 properties sold, right? So that's 2 properties per month. 2 properties per month. Last 6 months, there's been 12 properties sold. That's 2 properties a month. And then so we're absorbing 2 properties a month, right? So then you want to also look at, all you would do is in MLS, you click off of click off of closed and click on active. Don't change anything else. Click on active. And now how many properties meet that same criteria? Everything's the same, right? How many actives do you have? So we're absorbing 2 properties per month, like yours, Mr. and Ms. Seller, but there's 12 properties on the market or 24 properties on the market. So we have a 6-month supply or a 1-year supply of homes out there before you ever put your home on the market. So that's your competition. And that's where we refer to occasionally as the pricing right strategy. You want to price it so that it fits within that category of how many we have active out there, right? So we can work with that. And there's, on this one here, just a real quick, and this should be in that handout as well. When you take a look at it, 6-month supplies means you have a balanced market, right? If you have less than 6 months, your sellers, more than 6 months, buyers, you might see that a little fine-tuned as we work with the market and the changes that are going on with it as well. Yeah, that's it. If you're working on a CMA on a property and you have questions about it, you can always reach out to somebody and try to get some help with it. But the CMA is a market analysis based on today. So if I do a CMA today and I have the buyer, the seller is not going to list their property for 6 months, 6 months from now, that CMA I did today is not any good, right? Same thing goes with appraisals. The appraisal is based on today. However, some appraisals may stay with the property. If it's an FHA appraisal, it stays with the property. If it's VA, it stays with the veteran. If it's anything else, it doesn't matter. But FHA is supposed to stay with the property. So that's an important factor. If you're a listing agent, make sure the seller's aware of the fact if they get an offer in and it doesn't FHA and it doesn't appraise, then there may not be, and the next buyer comes in as FHA, they may be required to use that same appraisal. I will tell you that, but I've also had appraisers say that they don't see it pop up very often, not like it's supposed to, but that's the way it's supposed to be designed. Anybody have any questions on that aspect? Anything we covered? Eric, you have anything you can add or? No, we're good.
Yeah, real quick, Mac, on this, the seller net proceeds, I find it to be, only because it happens from time to time, to be extremely detailed with every single fee and charge that's on there. Don't be of the mindset that you gave it to them, you went over it real quick, they know at 180 that they're gonna get whatever the amount is, whatever they owe. Because when it comes to the day of closing or the day before closing or at the table and they start questioning those charges as to why am I paying for this, and their transactional expenses that they're not going to get away with or get away from, that it can be an issue. And you are ready to close as the agent, you're ready to close, and you may put yourself in a position where you are having to compromise your commission just to get the deal closed. Whether it's the survey, whether it's the residential service contract that you think you went over before it, or you did go over before at the listing presentation, whatever it might be, the closing costs. Why am I paying for their closing costs? I thought you were on my side, on the seller side. Why am I doing that? And it was, well, that's how the contract came. The buyer's agent wrote it. Well, you should have told us that that's what we were doing. And you mentioned it, but they don't know all the terms like we do. So you have to be extremely thorough.
Absolutely. Appreciate that. Anybody have any questions about that? Cool. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. Hope you got something out of this. I know, like I said, I know it was fairly quick. We're talking about working with the sellers. That should become routine for you. Obviously, listings are absolutely awesome, but we need buyer's agents, and everybody generally starts out as a buyer's agent. Some people are better at it than others. I was a horrible buyer's agent. I openly admit that. I unlocked the door and go, bedroom's over there, kitchen's over there, help yourself, let me know when you're done. No, that wasn't quite the way it went, but buyer's agents are pretty special in what they do. I've seen some really, really good ones. What do they sell an ice? Is that sell an igloo to an Eskimo? Something like that, right? But listings is the bread and butter of this business, and being able to do CMAs and work for that seller is really important. Anyway, appreciate it. If you guys need anything, let me know.
Thank you, sir.